Okay, in this video I'm going to be explaining how I make arrows, and I'm working on some arrows for a friend of mine. They're made from river cane. Now the first thing I do when I make arrows from river cane is I season them myself. I get them green, either from a friend or harvest them myself green, and I peel off the outer layer. Now a lot of guys don't do that, but I like to peel off the outer layer first and then season them. If they're really wet, like right after a storm or something, and they've been subjected to a lot of rain, I don't peel them right away, because they do tend to crack if you do that, especially right here at the nodes. So I guess I wait a little while to where I feel the cane is dry enough, and I peel off the outer layer when it's still fairly green. It makes it easier that way, and then I season them. Now these are dried for about 3 years or 4 years, so these have been there for a long time, but I think a year is good enough. And after they're seasoned, I go ahead and I cut a section out that spines to the correct spine. Now I wanted these to be between 50 and 55 pounds, so I just roughly put them on a spine tester, and then figured out which section would be the 55 pounds, and I cut the section, straightened them, and re-spined them, and then cut them to length. I cut them, in this case, 30 inches to give me some, extra area here in front of the node. I'll show you why I did that in a minute. But I try to match them all as far as where the nodes are. I try to match them toward the front. See, all these nodes are matched here. The other nodes I don't pay attention to. And at the bottom, I try not to get the node to be at the very end. So after I spine them, straighten them, I weigh them. Now, even though they're the same spine, in a lot of cases the weight differs a lot. Let's see if I can find the latest one I've got. Is 312 grains. The heaviest one is 340 grains, but they're both spined at 55 pounds and the same length. So there has to be a way to compensate for that, or to add weight somehow to these to get them to be the same. They have to all be at least 340. If I have a batch of these and the heaviest one's 340, they have all got to be at least 340, so you got to add some kind of weight. Now the foreshafts add a little bit of weight, but I don't depend on that. Sometimes I can't add very much foreshaft, or sometimes I don't add foreshaft at all. So what I do is I take a piece of grounding wire, copper grounding wire, and I glue that inside the node, inside this section here. That's one reason why I like the node in the front. And these are, give myself about 3 inches in this case, to make sure I had enough space for the wire, because the difference between 312 and 340 is quite a bit. Now these are for a 50-pound bow, so the total grain, the good practice would be, the total grain weight for a 50-pound bow would be a 500 grain arrow for these type of arrows, these traditional type of arrows. So I've already added some copper in here, so I'll just weigh this so I can show you what I've got this weighing at now. Turn it on first. I don't know if you can see that, but it's 408. 408 grains. So I've got to get them all up to about 408 grains. Now to do that, like I said, I use copper, and I just glue it inside here. So after I got them all to, what did I say, 408, around 400 grains a piece, I start figuring out what I'm going to do for the mounting of the arrowheads. Now for these, I chose 4 shafts, and these are Osage. I've got plenty of Osage scrap, so I just sand out some of these dowels on my sander. You know, I ripped them on the bandsaw square, and then I round them off on my sander, just by hand, kind of like I did that bone arrowhead. Anyway, I also taper this on the rounded part of the sander. Now this angle here roughly matches this angle here on this stone reamer that I use. And what I do is I just ream the hole, you know, so that's going to match up with this tapered foreshaft. And make sure it's tight. Now this is going to be different for each cane arrow, so all these have to be made separately. They can't be made mass production. They've got to be made to fit individually and customized to fit just right, and so there's no play. You don't want any back and forth motion like this. So this part of the foreshaft has to match the diameter, the inside diameter of the cane. And like I said, I round these on the belt sander on the rounded part of the belt, and I just made up this you know, I napped this reamer. It works pretty good. I just ream out the hole. I do that on all of them, one at a time, to fit the 4 shafts. Now these 4 shafts can be glued in permanently, which is what I'm going to do on the ones that I'm making. I'm going to finish out, I'll finish out these 3 completely, but those other 3 I'm going to be sending off as a kit, so they won't be complete. But I'll go over the process of how I complete these in upcoming videos. This is the first in the series. And I also mark, once I have these aligned and fit properly, I put marks on these so I know where to realign. Now the next step, after I get the 4 shafts and the shafts matched up, there is an important step in here I forgot to mention, is the wrapping of the cane here. Now I just wrap with regular thread. I like to use this here. It's 37% cotton and 63% polyester. It's a very strong thread, and I use this for mounting feathers and for mounting the arrowheads for the arrowhead wrap. I'm going to be using mainly modern materials, well, basically all modern materials for these arrows. I'll be using Titebond to glue. I already glued these 4 shafts in permanently, just waiting for the glue to dry with the Titebond. I'll be using Titebond with the thread to wrap the arrowheads. I'll be using Titebond with the thread to wrap the fletchings and to wrap the nock just ahead of the nock so it doesn't split the cane. These are primitive arrows, but they're basically modern primitive arrows. I'll be using obsidian arrowheads, and this size is legal in most states. 1-inch base, 1-inch wide base, no barbs, which means basically straight base. And there's a big difference between the modern interpretation of a hunting point, either stone or obsidian, and real ones. Now these are reproductions of a couple of Southwest point styles, or Texas point styles. And you can see the big difference between what they used to really use for hunting and the modern interpretation. So these have got barbs. They're very lightweight. They weigh less than 40 grains a piece, and they're very, very thin. These weigh on average about 60 grains, relatively thick, so they're durable, and 1 inch wide at the base, which meets most laws for hunting deer, which is what these will be used for. So these are arrows for hunting deer, made of river cane. I hope I've covered all the steps here. Let's see. I didn't mention how much the foreshaft and the arrowheads, they add up to about 100 grains. So at 408 plus 100 grains is about 508. It's going to vary a little bit. So about 500 grains is pretty good for a 50-pound bow, which is what these are for. 50-pound bow at 28-inch draw, which means quite a bit is going to stick out beyond the bow. But there's two reasons for that. I like to keep the weight forward as much as possible on the arrow. I could have put the copper weight inside this part of the arrow and still kept it, the weight in front of center. But for me, the arrows fly much better if I keep the weight as far forward as possible. And that's why I match the nodes up front. It kind of gives me a backing for the copper wire so they back up into it. And this leaves me plenty of room for a long enough piece of wire just in case I need it. And also for the foreshaft, the part that inserts into the cane has to be sufficiently long to give enough stability. So that plus the copper, I give myself about 3 inches just to be safe. They don't touch inside usually. Okay, now once these are dry, what I'm going to do is remove this thread, sand this foreshaft down to match the diameter of the cane, and then I'll taper it, notch it, and mount the arrowhead in here. But I'll go over that in the next video or in one of the next videos. And after all that's done, I rewrap, or I don't rewrap it, I wrap the arrowhead, and then I'll end up rewrapping this part of the cane. So it'll go about ½ inch below the arrowhead, and then another wrapping, I guess about an inch on the cane here, so it'll prevent it from splitting just in case. The glue bond is usually pretty strong, but I like to wrap it anyway. But I'll get into that in the next video. Okay, let's see if I remembered everything here. I'll be making some more videos on different kinds of arrows, but for now this is a good opportunity for me, since I am making a set for a friend of mine. Traditional primitive arrows. Okay, that's it. Okay, I went ahead and sanded these foreshafts down. Slight taper. You'll notice that the joint here is not perfect, but I'm going to wrap thread around that, try to even that out. It doesn't have to be perfect. And while I sanded those, I went ahead and sanded in the nocks. They're not completely done. All you need though is a little scrap piece of sandpaper to finish these out. Let's see here. I just sanded down just barely through the wall of the cane, so that the finish sanding is pretty straightforward, and it gives me about 1/8 of an inch on for these nocks, for this width here at the end. Very easy to do these nocks on river cane. Now these are kind of deep, but I'd rather have them deep than not. There's not much to it. Then I'm going to wrap just above that, so I need to make sure that there's good contact with the glue and the shaft, so I'm roughing that up. I won't do the other ones. Let me just wrap this one here. The sun's creeping in here. Let's see, I think I'll be alright. I have to move my chair here. Okay. Just add a little glue before I wrap. Thread in a coffee mug keeps the spool from bouncing around when I'm doing this. And I'll fill that gap first. Wipe off the extra. I'll wrap it down, maybe not quite an inch. Turn it this way. Might see it better. I'll stop there, you get the idea. I'll wrap one layer, put some glue on it, let it dry, then wrap the next layer, and so on. It usually doesn't need more than 2 layers. Remove the excess glue. This is a damp rag. Okay, so I'll do that 2 or 3 times, whatever I feel is enough. Same thing on this knock here. It's getting kind of windy. I hope that's not interfering. Do a couple layers of this. And you got to kind of work fast before the glue dries completely. This way I only do 1 or 2 layers at a time. I'll probably wrap another layer around that just to build it up a little more. Pretty easy, straightforward stuff. Okay, went ahead and finished the wrappings in the front. I did some extra wraps in that gap between the foreshaft and the main shaft just to level it out. The glue is pretty dry. There's 2 layers of thread there. I did the backs also, 3 layers of thread, and I went ahead and decreased the depth of these nocks. I just sanded these down to make this depth a little less. I think I've got a little over a 1/4 inch now for the depth of those nocks, which looks a lot better. And since it's kind of windy, I went ahead and fletched this off camera. Now it's still in a preliminary stage. I just want to show you how I did this, or explain how I did it. I'll probably do this whole thing in a different video when it's less windy. But what I did first is I laid out some marks. And I usually end the fletch on this type of arrow. I end the fletch about an inch away from the back, and the front part, the very front of the fletchings, is 6 inches, roughly 6 inches from the back of the arrow. In this case, it's about 5 3/4. So, and I made another mark where this wrapping is too. You can't really see it. So the total length of the fletching is about 4 1/2 or 4 1/4, which is adequate, very adequate. Yeah, about 4 1/4. And I just did a spiral wrap on it, and I want to show you how this can be adjusted. I went ahead and pulled the cock feather tight, but you can see the other feathers are not quite lined up. And what the spiral wrap allows you to do is make adjustments, and then you pull tight to straighten it. So you can make fine-tune adjustments while the wrapping is not glued down. Now I need to move the back end of this feather back closer to this to even it out. I think I pulled a little too hard on the back end here, and might have snapped some of that, or broke some of that quill, but that's fine. I'll be able to glue that down later. And this one needs to be moved here also. And I just eyeball this. When I think it's good, I'll just stretch it out, make some more fine-tune adjustments. The thread holds it down. But since it's not glued down, I can make adjustments to it. Again, I just pull the back end, make it straighter. And if there's any weird areas in the fletch, I can kind of correct by just moving the main part of the vein here. See if we can show you. Now on the back of the feather, see if I can explain this. The way I see it, the back of the feather curves this way. The front of the feather needs to be going the opposite way. So I just want to check that part. The curve is going that way. The front needs to be going the opposite way. You know, slightly angled so it'll spin properly. I'll zoom out here. Maybe it'll look better from a distance. And this is just peeled fletchings, and with a preliminary cut, so it'd be easier to do the spiral wrap. And after I glue these down, I'm going to run a bead of glue along the thread and along the edge of that vein, and on all the wrapping. I'll just brush on the glue with a paintbrush. Let's see if I can find the paintbrush here. Okay, I just brush on the glue right over the top of the thread and right up on the veins and on all the wrapping, but I'll show that in a different video when it's not so windy. For now, I just want to get this part done and upload it so you guys can see. And after everything's glued down and dry, I'll do the final trimming on the feathers. And this front part will be wrapped down with a single layer, nice and flat. Right now it's not even glued down, it's just wrapped on itself. Same with this here. There's no glue on it at all at any point. So it allows me to make adjustments. You see how easily it moves. And all I did was I peeled these feathers off. I didn't trim any of that membrane. It's all still on there from the original feather. When I put glue on there, that'll hold it down really well. I do the same with all my arrows now. It just keeps it simple. Unless I'm doing a reproduction, I use the same fletching technique for all my arrows. Okay, that's it. Okay, if you guys are still with me and haven't fallen asleep at this point, what I'm doing is I'm just securing the fletching just ahead of these two marks. Because what I'm going to do is later on, I'm going to remove some of that thread here and just rewrap it. But you'll see that in a little bit. So it doesn't have to be neat or anything in the beginning here. I just want to secure the front of this fletching, and I gave myself plenty of room as far as the feather is concerned. This front part of the feather, I gave myself plenty of room for this wrapping, just to secure the tips of the feathers. And I just eyeball this. I don't really measure. After a while you get the feel for how it should look. And since there's no glue, I can make adjustments right now. Now the spiral wrapping, the best results on the spiral wrapping are when you space these wrappings about 1/4 of an inch apart. But I just eyeball that. I don't really put any marks for the spiral wrapping on the arrow. I did in the beginning for some of my arrows, but I don't do that anymore. I just guesstimate. But if you have a spacing that's wider than 1/4 inch, it really doesn't hold down the fletching well enough. You'll get some wrinkles in here that are kind of annoying when you're applying glue to the whole thing. Of course, you can space these closer than 1/4 inch if you want to. It just takes more time, of course. And the shorter fletch makes it easier to do this. That's why I trim these down. They're not full height. Like I've seen on another video, I think the feathers were glued down first, but they were still full height when the guy was wrapping. I find it much easier with shorter feathers. Now once you get in the zone, this goes much faster. Right now I'm trying very carefully to keep the spacing just right. And it pays off in the end to be careful with this process. The fletching is almost as aggravating as the flint knapping the tips, the arrowheads. It took me a while to get to the point where I could fletch without pulling my hair out. With this type of method, you know, without any jigs or anything, Now if I had to do 1,000 of these, I don't know what I would do. I'd probably have to come up with some sort of jig. Which I might develop that and then show it in another video. But for now I'm just going to show you this technique. It can be done anywhere. You don't need jigs or a special shop or anything. All you need is scissors and thread and a place out of the wind, and you're all set. On my own personal arrows, I don't really space a wrapping this close. Just for the sake of speed, I guess the wrapping on my personal arrows is about 3/8 to a 1/2 inch apart. Because it does take a lot of time if you space these wrappings real close together. Okay, so I'm just going to tuck these in, this thread in behind the quills here, or the membrane. Just enough to hold it in place. Then I'll make the adjustments. I'll stop the video here and zoom in and film the rest. Okay, so I'm just going to straighten these out. With the spacing that close together, I don't have to pull very much on the fletching to get it straight and flat. The wrapping itself has flattened out the vein pretty good at the bottom. Now, forgive me if I don't know the right terms for all this. I think these are called the veins here, these upright portions. So I'm going to call these the veins, the membrane at the bottom, and the feather as a whole I should be calling a fletch. So right now I'm adjusting the fletches to be equally spaced and straight. Now this system takes some time. It takes more time than using a jig or a clamp system to attach these fletches, but this system works pretty good with irregular surfaces. there's a node here, but with the wrapping it adjusts to the contour, so it can be very irregular but still get a good contact with the or between the fletch and the arrow shaft, and you're still able to make adjustments and make these fletchings very straight or spiral or whatever you want. And adjusting these is nice because you can, try to compensate for that irregular surface by pushing and adjusting the bottom, and it may not look straight, but at least the fletching will stand straight. That's what you want. Okay, so that's pretty good. Now there's one back end here that's too far over, so I can trim that now or trim it later. I guess I'll just trim it later. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just put some glue on here now. I get my paintbrush. I'll just run a bead down and then spread it out with a paintbrush. I'm laying it on pretty thick. It shrinks quite a bit as it dries. I'm getting a little bit on the quills here. It's not. It doesn't matter too much down here. I just got to make sure I don't get any glue up on these parts up here. And I got to work kind of fast because the glue dries. It becomes tacky really quick. The moisture from the glue will cause the fletch to expand, so I just pull a little bit to get that, try to get that fletch back down tight. Wipe the brush. The glue is getting a little tacky on the brush. Spacing is a little bit off, but I'm not going to worry too much about that. I'll push it a little bit. Again, I gotta work fast before that glue dries up or it becomes tacky. Because once it becomes tacky, it's hard to brush. Okay, and while the glue is still tacky, I can pull on these to make sure the fletching is tight down to the shaft, because like I said, the moisture from the glue will cause it to expand a little bit. So I'm just pulling this to stretch it out, make sure it's flat against the shaft. Okay, so what I'll do now is wait for that to dry. While this is drying, I'll fletch the other ones, and then I'll come back and show you how I finish up the fletching. Okay, the glue is pretty much dry now. I went ahead and dried it with a heat gun. And what that does is it cuts down the drying time from about 20 minutes to like 3 minutes, 3 to 5 minutes. So I'm going to continue right now. There's still some spots where the glue is not completely dry, but you can see how transparent it is. And right now it's dry enough to hold down that thread. So I'm going to remove this thread in front of those marks. There's some pencil marks on here where that'll guide me to where I want the wrapping to be, here and also on the back here. All this other membrane and thread are going to be removed. I'll show you that. And the reason why I do this is so I can lay down just a single layer of thread, and it'll be nice and flat. Cut back on the quill or on the membrane. Being careful I don't cut into the arrow. Okay. I also went ahead and trimmed all of these the same off camera, the backs of the fletching. Okay. Add a little bit more glue. Some glue over the top. Try to flatten that out as much as possible. So a single layer lays pretty flat. It makes it nice. When you shoot it, you won't feel that thread there, or you barely feel it. I don't need to be as neat on the back side. Yeah, a single layer is fine. I mean, I don't even know how necessary it is once the glue is applied here to wrap the ends, but I just like the way it looks. Okay. So the only step left now is to trim the feathers at the height that I want. I'll leave that for later. Well, I can do that. I can do that now. I'll just trim them to make it look more even. I'll probably dress it up later on. Cut it down slightly more. If I think it needs it. Okay, just a little neater. I'll decide on the final height later on when I shoot my target arrows. I'm making some target arrows out of this material, you know, to match. So when I'm shooting the target arrows, I'll figure out if this is too tall or if it's good height. Okay, so that's pretty much it for the fletchings on these. I've got some other arrows that I did before. I'll show you the fletchings on those. The cool thing about Titebond is it's transparent, or fairly transparent. It's got a little bit of yellowish tint to it, but you can paint the shaftment and then apply the glue right over the top of the paint, and it still looks pretty good. It will yellow if you have a white color on the shaft. It will make it yellow, but other than that, it's transparent. And another cool thing is you can add pigments to the Titebond. like here I added lamp black and a brown dye to the tight bond before I brushed it on, and that's what it looks like. This is to imitate the pine tar, I mean not pine tar, but the birch tar that was used on arrows in Europe during the Neolithic times, at least. It kind of saves some time too, because I fletched these in the same way that you just saw, and all I did was brush on this pigmented glue, so it looks like the birch tar. Okay, and I'll get into making these types of arrows. These are what I call self arrows, which is just a single piece of wood all the way through. There's no foreshafts or anything, and these are dogwood. I'll get into making these type of arrows in another video. Okay, that's it. Okay, all I did there was I cut the notch for the arrowhead on the bandsaw, obviously, and then check the alignment. The bottom of the notch is a little loose, which is fine because I need to adjust the alignment of the tip. After I glue it, I'll adjust the alignment of the tip, and the glue will fill the gaps in this notch. I'll glue it after I taper these square ends here. They'll be tapered inward, then I'll wrap down below the nock, but everything else will be supported by glue, by epoxy glue that I'll put on here. Okay. Okay, I'm going to take this opportunity to explain the concept of spinning the point to check alignment. Now I'm just going to spin this on my leg by just moving my hand across it like this and holding it as still as I can with my left hand and checking the tip of that arrowhead to see if it moves. Now this looks like it's on straight. I just aligned it, and you can tell that as I spin it, the tip does not rock back and forth. I'm going to misalign it on purpose so you can see the difference. Now that's exaggerated, but you can see how it rocks back and forth. The tip will move back and forth, or from side to side. Now if I realign that, realign it from the side and from the front view, and check it again, you'll notice that there is a slight movement. Let's try it again. I had to keep this left hand as still as possible so we can see it. Still doesn't look quite right. And just got to experiment with it, play around with it. So it looks like that tip is not moving at all from side to side. Okay, that's pretty close. Now some guys will spin the arrowhead like this to check for alignment. Now I've never been able to do it that way, and I'm not sure why that's done that way, but it seems to me that putting it on something would mess up the alignment. So I check it in the air. That looks pretty good. You can tell it does not move. That point is on there straight. Okay, just wanted to illustrate that and show you how I align the points. Okay, I just want to go over this before I lose daylight. These are the finished points on the arrows, and I've applied epoxy in the joint here and wrapped thread down on the foreshaft. Now the type of epoxy I used says it works on glass, so I just use this type here, Loctite epoxy. It still needs to dry overnight. I made sure the transitions were smooth. The fletchings are finished. I'm just going to leave them like this and send them out this way, and my friend can cut these down if he needs to. I'm going to make some, or finish these target arrows tonight, and they match the weight. These bone tips here match the weight of this obsidian point plus the foreshaft. So let's see how much these weigh here. 104 grains, and this is cow bone. Excuse me, it's cow bone that I get at PetSmart. From the middle section of the bone, that's where the thickest part is. You can see it's not completely round. It's because the bone isn't that thick. It's 3 inches long. Thickest part is 3/8 wide. And I just sanded them down to match. I'll glue these in with epoxy. I'll glue these in permanently and then wrap this tight. I split this at the end of the cane here by mistake when I was fitting this in without the wrapping. That's why I wrapped these, but I took the wrapping off while I was sanding this, and I ended up pushing too hard and cracking the cane, but that's fine. With the epoxy and a strong wrap, I'll pull it tight when I wrap this, it'll stay in pretty good. Now these are target arrows for practice, because it's difficult to shoot or to find a target that'll accept this type of arrowhead without breaking it. So I rarely ever shoot glass points or obsidian points at a target. I always make matching target arrows. So in this case I'm using bone here. And I think that's it. Not much else to it except for the final finish on the shaft. I think I'll put a wax on here. Not sure exactly what kind yet. I can also put more glue around this wrapping to make it smoother, because it feels a little rough. Even though it's laid down flat, it still feels a little rough. If I put more glue over this, it'll smooth it out. It's important to have a smooth area in just behind the arrowhead, so you're not impeding the penetration of the arrow. See if I can spin that. Points don't move. So they're all aligned. The epoxy gives me some time before it sets up, so I was able to make final adjustments pretty easily. Okay. That's it.